Well, that was weird. I don't mean in a good way, random dance-off, Umbrella Academy wackiness, but it's all for a purpose weird. It was bad weird. Welcome back, Fang Gang. We are here to talk about Umbrella Academy Season 4. I've watched it, all of it, in its entirety. I've watched it so you don't have to watch it. But we're going to talk about it in depth. Spoiler alert in effect. So you probably have watched it if you're watching this video, and you probably know why I feel as I do about this show. But in case you would like to know in detail, let's get into that. This season had promise, honestly. It started off on a good note, and Umbrella Academy itself is such a cool concept that, you know, you think to yourself, if you just continue the flow, how could you mess it up? And then we have season 4, and we find out how we could mess it up. How do you mess up Umbrella Academy? Well, first, do Umbrella Academy, but take away all of the charm that this show has. This season loses the charm so quickly. Oh my goodness. This is a season that feels like it is still wacky, but it's more wacky for the sake of being wacky as opposed to serving any actual purpose in relation to the story and the characters and what's going on with them. The season honestly starts off pretty solid. I do like the idea of our characters having to live lives without powers and having to accept the mundanity of life and adjust to just being a normal person. I actually think that's a really cool, fun concept. However, we don't really stay in that too long. We kind of only stay in that for the first couple episodes, if that, the first episode really, and then it quickly becomes less about dealing with that adjustment and more becomes about now we have powers back and we're all really sick and oh, the world's ending again. Which there's nothing wrong with the world ending again. That's clearly what we're usually dealing with in Umbrella Academy, but there's no cohesion with this end of the world. There's no sense of through line with the characters at all. The characters don't really evolve as much as they do in other seasons. It feels less focused than other seasons. Everyone feels like they're honestly just off doing their own side quests, trying to ignore the fact that the main quest is happening, even though about halfway through we establish the importance of what we need to be focusing on, of everything that is happening with Ben and how Ben, we need to make sure that he's being kept away because the whole main quest is, you know, we gotta keep Ben away from Jennifer, and we realize this, and then it's like almost no one cares about that, even though that's going to end not just this world, but it's going to end like all of the multiverse, basically. Like we're going multiverse in season 4. You know, eventually everything has to go multiverse. In this economy, you gotta go multiverse. I actually don't even mind that we went multiverse. I just feel like there's so many ideas here that are never fully actualized, fully realized, or fully explained. Like, why is this the Ben that we get back? Why is it awful Ben? Why anything? Why is there a subway system that takes you to different timelines? And how does that work? And why do we just stumble into it? And why is it never fully explored? I have so many questions. I have more questions than I have answers with season 4. And it feels like everything is not given enough time to be explored and is just kind of thrown in there. And then we're just full speed traveling through this season in a way that destroys anything that could be good in it. The fact that the characters are all off doing their own things and they don't seem to care about the end of the world at all wouldn't bother me if I felt like they were doing anything of note, but they kind of aren't. So everything just feels really self-indulgent and really selfish of them. And it's not like in season 1 where, you know, people almost seem like they're still coming to terms with, is this even the end of the world? There's a lot of push and pull there. There's not a reason for them to I guess, not care about it. Like, I feel like they should care, but they just don't. And it's like, is it because they have too much going on in their lives? Not really. Not much is going on in anyone's life here for the most part. So that's a problem. The characters in general, in some instances, become borderline unbearable, especially Diego. Diego in this season is one of the worst characters. He is so whiny, and it feels like any evolution for his character that we had through the other seasons has been completely erased. And he also doesn't even seem to be in character. At the beginning of this season, he actually wants to work with the CIA, and you think about season 1 Diego, and that just feels completely out of place for his character. Like, Diego used to be this guy that was really excited to be like a vigilante, and like he didn't really like working with, you know, the cops. He didn't like working with actual sanctioned groups that are government run or anything like that. He was like, justice is like my thing, like you don't get to decide. So it all felt just strange to me. It's weird. I mean, I guess he does kind of work with the cops in season 1, but he just felt more anti-establishment initially, and now he's like gone full establishment for some reason because it's the CIA. I don't like his character in this at all. On the other hand, I feel like Victor is actually one of my favorite characters in this season. I feel like Victor is one of the few characters that actually feels like they're getting some kind of character evolution here, and I do feel like Elliot Page, when he's on screen, is very interesting to watch, is actually trying to bring something to this season, actually grabs my attention. So at least there was that, but unfortunately it's not enough to carry the entire show. And even that, they only give Victor a little bit to do. Victor has some stuff to do with his dad and still resolving that tension there, and that was kind of cool to see. But there's also a moment when everyone's trying to get their memories back, and Victor's just like, yeah, like I want to get my memories back too. And they're like, Victor, you weren't there when Ben died. And Victor's like, I'd still just like to know everything. And I'm like, how does that make any sense? Like, I understand in the context of what they're trying to build for the character evolution, but this plot just doesn't make any sense. So many things don't make sense. Another thing that doesn't make sense, the romance between Lila and Five. Why did this happen? What is happening? Why is this happening? I even will say, maybe it could have worked if it felt like we were building up to it. It felt like they were building to it, but in a way that I was like, no, they're not gonna do that, right? Because that wouldn't make any sense. Because we haven't actually established any romantic blocks here. And then they get lost in the timeline subway, which also takes me out of it because they shot all that in the abandoned subway in Toronto. It's like the second Bay Station, and I've actually shot in Bay Station. I was in a commercial that shot down there, and every time I see it, I can only think of just being in Bay Station. But anyways, I digress. They get lost in the subway, and then obviously because they're there for years, they kind of come together, and Five even falls in love with Lila. I don't know if Lila really loves Five, but Five loves Lila. But it's all montages. We don't really get to see the relationship. We don't get to see the small moments that you need to actually build that and make it be believable. It's just thrown at us, and it feels so out of place. And Five doesn't even feel like he's Five when he's in this relationship. It feels like he becomes a totally different person, which would be fine if we explored that evolution, but we just have no time. We have no time for anything in this season, and it really is awful because it means that everything sucks. Things are just inconsistent. They don't make sense. They contradict other personality traits that we know that characters already have, that have been established, that have been built over time. Another thing with the characters that feels really weird is we get these powers. Everyone gets their powers back, or also gets like different versions of their powers in some regards. Lila gets powers in general, which she didn't have before, but some of these powers also allow people to like team up and like combine energies and all of this stuff that I don't think was established before. Was this established before? And it's never really fully explained how any of it works. So it's not specific. And this is a pet peeve that I have about superpowers in film or TV in general, is when people have powers, but they're not specifically defined. It seems like a thing that maybe this doesn't bother other people. Maybe it's just because I read a lot of comics, but I feel like in comics, a lot of the times when we deal with powers, they tend to be pretty clearly defined. It's a pretty important thing to do in your world. And here, there's some stuff that's happening that they're just like, these people, they're just putting their powers together, whatever. And I'm like, whatever? No, I need to understand this. I also understand Abigail Hargreaves' motivation for wanting to die. She feels like she really messed up, and she's like, this is the way it's supposed to be, and I want to die. But why would you take the whole world with you? Like, does she know that the marigold had effects on the timeline and this will reset everything and make everything right? Because that's never really fully established in the show. So it just seems like she's like, well, I need to atone, and I guess everyone else, just screw them. Just like everyone else can die. Who cares? So it's really weird, and it's kind of weird that they made her the villain. I would have liked that better if it was more clearly defined why she wanted all of the world to end, other than her own personal motivations. But then her personal motivations and her characterization doesn't fit with the role of the biggest bad. In fact, I feel like Nick Offerman and Megan Mullally here were just robbed of getting to be the big bads. Their characters in the beginning of this show are so scary. They're so scary and unhinged as Jean and mysterious, and I loved everything we initially built with them, but then in the end, they just have no teeth. They get to do a fun little line dance sequence. That's fun, I guess, but they really just were robbed of anything fun. They become these characters that have no teeth. They're killed off really quickly in the end, defeated really easily, and I felt like there was no point to them. I mean, to be fair, I don't think we'd ever have villains in Umbrella Academy, in terms of the show anyways, that were as good as Cha-Cha and Hazel were in season 1. Now, granted, I haven't read the comics, so I don't know what we're dealing with over there, but I do want to go and read the comics after, now that this show is done, so I can wash the bad taste that season 4 out of my mouth, because that's how poorly this ended for me. I'm also wondering, how was 5 the first to figure out the solution here for, you know, how the siblings all have to die to reset the timeline? There's like basically a council of 5s. There's like this league of 5s, and they have their little deli, and they're all chilling there, and they're like, yeah, we've all come together, and like none of us have been able to figure it out. Like, we've all tried to fix the end of the world problem. It's never gonna happen, man. It's never gonna happen. And then he pretty quickly is like, oh, I see. The problem is us. So if we just get rid of us, then we fix this. So is it that they never came up with that, or other 5s knew that and they just didn't want to do it? Because it seems like none of them were able to come up with it, and then this 5 comes up with it pretty quickly. Once again, not enough time, and things that happen that, like I said, just don't really make sense. I can't justify some of these choices that they're making in this season. Ultimately, this was a disappointing ending to a show that most of the time I thoroughly enjoyed and found to be quirky, fun, and different, especially in the superhero genre. It really does something that you don't see in a lot of places, and it's unfortunate that it went this way. Seasons 1 through 3 were all pretty great and pretty interesting to me, each in their own way. I will say I did appreciate the callback at the end of this show that shows, you know, some of the characters from the earlier seasons whose lives were basically ruined by the events of the story, and who kind of get their, like, you know, their happy ending. They all get to live their lives without the interference of the Umbrella Academy and the Marigold and all that stuff. But it also just kind of made me nostalgic for the earlier seasons and made me be like, man, what a mess we made of this season. The whole season just feels messy, incomplete, and rushed. It's so disappointing. Overall, I have to give this, I think, a 2 out of 5 this season. There were still a few moments that I liked, and like some of the characters' stories were at least fun and interesting to watch, like everything that happened with Klaus going from being someone who's like doing all of the substances to someone who is super sober and is actually a hypochondriac, and then Klaus's powers allowing him, when he gets them back, to be possessed by ghosts and using that as a medium to allow clients' dead spouses to possess him so he could then sleep with the clients. It was like this whole weird thing that was going on with Klaus that I actually enjoyed. I thought it was interesting, but honestly, there's just not enough cohesion, not enough wit, and not enough off-the-wall plot twists to make up for everything that's going on in the season that's just awful. It can't hold up to the prior seasons because anything that is established here that seems interesting feels like it's completely squandered. So ultimately, I was very disappointed. I'd love to hear your thoughts on season 4 and your thoughts on Umbrella Academy in general, since obviously I wasn't posting on my channel regularly at the time that the earlier seasons came out, although I have been watching it this whole time. If you are also nostalgic for earlier seasons, let me know if you want me to go back and maybe talk about any of those or revisit them. Let me know if you want to hear my thoughts on the comic when I do get around to reading it. Let me know how you feel about the comic compared to the show if you've read it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. That's everything for me for this one. I'll see you next time, and until then, friends, stay nerdy. Bye!